I was setting up for our office Christmas party, hanging tinsel and putting up decorations. The place was buzzing with excitement, people running around with boxes of ornaments and strings of lights. I'd volunteered to handle the high-up stuff since I'm pretty tall. As I was stretching to reach the top of the tree, I felt the ladder wobble beneath me. I tried to steady myself, but it was too late. The ladder tipped, and I came crashing down. It all happened so fast. 1 second I was reaching for a star. The next I was sprawled on the floor, tangled in tinsel and lights. But that wasn't the worst of it. The ladder had slammed into the electrical panel on the wall. There was a loud pop, and suddenly sparks were flying everywhere. The lights flickered, and then everything went dark. For a moment, there was just stunned silence. Then someone screamed. That's when I smelled the smoke. A small fire had broken out where the sparks had hit some paper decorations. People started rushing around in a panic. Someone yelled about calling the fire department. I could hear the sounds of people stumbling in the dark, knocking things over. I tried to get up, but my leg was throbbing from the fall. I managed to pull myself to my feet, leaning against the wall for support. The smoke was getting thicker, and I could feel my eyes starting to sting. I knew I needed to get out of there fast. I started making my way towards where I thought the exit was, but in the darkness and chaos, I got turned around. I found myself in a part of the office I didn't recognize. The smoke was getting worse, making it hard to breathe. I was coughing, trying to cover my mouth with my sleeve. That's when I spotted the supply closet. I remembered there was a fire extinguisher in there. If I could just get to it, maybe I could help put out the fire. I stumbled towards the door, pushed it open, and went inside. The moment I stepped in, I heard a click behind me. The door had shut. I reached for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. My heart started racing as I realized I was trapped. The closet was pitch black, and I could feel the walls closing in around me. I banged on the door, yelling for help, but the sounds of panic outside drowned out my voice. The smoke was seeping in through the cracks, filling the small space. I could feel myself starting to choke. I fumbled around in the dark, desperate to find something to help me. My hands touched shelves, boxes, cleaning supplies, but no fire extinguisher. The air was getting thinner, and I was struggling to breathe. My lungs burned with every gasp. The smoke was getting thicker by the second. I could barely see my hand in front of my face. I tried to stay low, remembering something about smoke rising, but there was nowhere to go in the tiny closet. I was trapped, helpless, as the smoke continued to pour in. My mind was racing. Would anyone realize I was missing in all the chaos? Would they find me before it was too late? The thought of dying alone in a supply closet during a Christmas party was almost too much to bear. I kept banging on the door, my strikes getting weaker as the lack of oxygen took its toll. My throat was raw from shouting and coughing. I could feel myself getting dizzy, my thoughts becoming muddled. In my desperation, I started throwing things at the door, hoping to make enough noise for someone to hear. Bottles of cleaning fluid crashed against the wood, their contents spilling out. The chemical smell mixed with the smoke, making the air even more toxic. As I gasped for air, my hand brushed against something metallic. For a moment, hope surged through me. Had I finally found the fire extinguisher? But as I grabbed it, I realized it was just a mop bucket. In my frustration, I hurled it at the door with all the strength I had left. The crash was deafening in the small space. For a moment, everything went silent. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A low hissing sound, like gas escaping. In the darkness, I couldn't see what I'd hit, but the acrid smell filling the air told me all I needed to know. One of the cleaning products must have ruptured, releasing its contents into the already toxic air. Panic set in fully. I was no longer just fighting smoke, but a potentially deadly mix of chemicals. My eyes were burning, my lungs felt like they were on fire. I couldn't tell if the dizziness was from lack of oxygen or the fumes. I slumped against the door, my strength fading. The hissing continued, a sinister soundtrack to my predicament. I could feel myself slipping into unconsciousness, my thoughts becoming jumbled. In my oxygen-deprived state, I started hallucinating. The walls seemed to breathe, closing in on me. I thought I could hear Christmas carols playing faintly, a cruel reminder of the festive occasion that had turned into a nightmare. Just when I thought it was over, When the darkness was about to consume me entirely, I felt the door give way behind me. I tumbled backward, gasping as fresh air hit my lungs. Hands grabbed me, pulling me away from the toxic cloud billowing out of the closet. As I lay on the floor, coughing and wheezing, trying to clear my lungs, I saw firefighters rushing past, their masks and tanks a stark contrast to the cheerful Christmas decorations still hanging around the office. Hey there. Hope you're enjoying the video so far. If you do, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps the channel to grow and reach more people. And now, our neighborhood's always been big on Christmas. Every year we have this potluck thing where everyone brings a dish. It's usually pretty fun, you know? A chance to catch up with neighbors, try some good food, that sort of thing. This year it was at the Johnsons' place. They've got that big house on the corner with the nice backyard. I remember walking up to their house holding my casserole. The place was all decked out in lights, and you could hear Christmas music playing from inside. As soon as I stepped in, the warmth hit me. It was packed. Seemed like the whole neighborhood was there. The living room was crammed with people, all chattering away. There was a massive Christmas tree in the corner, practically buried in ornaments. I made my way to the dining room where all the food was set up. The table was groaning under the weight of all the dishes, everything from turkey to tamales. I put my casserole down and started mingling. You know how it is at these things. Small talk about the weather, complaining about property taxes, that kind of stuff. I was chatting with my next-door neighbor about his new car when I spotted the ham. Now, I'm not usually big on ham, but this looked amazing. It was perfectly glazed, sitting there on a silver platter like something out of a cooking show. I couldn't resist. I grabbed a plate and cut myself a thick slice. The first bite was incredible. Juicy, flavorful, easily the best ham I'd ever tasted. I was about to compliment whoever brought it when I felt something off. It was just a little catch in my throat at first. Nothing major, you know. I figured I'd just swallowed wrong. I tried to clear my throat, but it didn't help. That little catch started to feel more like a lump. I took a sip of water, thinking that would sort it out. It didn't. If anything, it made it worse. The lump seemed to grow, and suddenly I was having trouble swallowing it all. I must have made some kind of noise because my neighbor looked at me funny. He asked if I was okay, but I couldn't answer. My throat felt like it was closing up. I tried to cough, to somehow dislodge whatever was stuck, but I couldn't even do that. That's when the panic started to set in. I could feel my chest tightening, not just from the lack of air, but from the fear. I tried to take a deep breath, but nothing happened. It was like trying to suck air through a straw that was pinched shut. I must have looked pretty bad because now people were starting to stare. Someone laughed, probably thinking I was doing some kind of bit. But this was no joke. I could feel my face getting hot, my eyes wide with panic. I tried to speak, to tell someone what was happening, but no sound came out. Just a weird, strangled noise. I grabbed at my throat, the universal sign for choking, but people just looked confused. Someone patted me on the back like I'd just had too much to drink or something. My vision started to get blurry. The room seemed to tilt and sway. The Christmas music in the background started to sound distorted, like it was playing underwater. I stumbled, knocking into the table. Dishes clattered, and I heard gasps, but it all sounded far away. I could feel my lungs burning, screaming for air. My fingers and toes started to tingle. Black spots danced in front of my eyes. I was dimly aware of falling to my knees, but I couldn't feel the impact. Everything was going numb. It's hard to describe what it feels like when your body is desperately trying to breathe but can't. It's not like holding your breath, it's more like being underwater, but the surface is covered in ice and you can't break through. You know air is right there, just out of reach, but you can't get to it. I don't know how long I was on the floor. Time seemed to stretch and warp. I was vaguely aware of commotion around me, people shouting, someone pulling at my arms, but it all felt distant, unreal. The world was shrinking, narrowing down to just the burning in my chest and the pounding in my head. Just when I thought it was over, when the darkness was starting to close in completely, something changed. There was a sharp pain in my abdomen, and suddenly I could breathe again. Air rushed into my lungs so fast it hurt. I coughed violently, my whole body shaking with the force of it. As I gasped and sputtered, I slowly became aware of my surroundings again. I was on the floor, a crowd of worried faces hovering over me. The Christmas music was still playing, an oddly cheerful backdrop to what had just happened. Someone was rubbing my back as I continued to cough. When I could finally focus, I saw the piece of ham on the floor next to me. Such a small thing to have caused so much trouble. It looked harmless now, just a bit of food on the carpet. But moments ago, it had nearly killed me. The room was silent except for my ragged breathing. The festive atmosphere from earlier was gone, replaced by a tense, shocked quiet. I could see the fear and concern on everyone's faces, mirroring what I had just experienced. As I sat there, still trying to catch my breath, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. A normal Christmas party, a simple piece of ham, and I had come terrifyingly close to dying right there on the Johnsons' dining room floor. Someone helped me to my feet. My legs felt weak, barely able to support me. The room swam a bit as I stood, and I had to lean on the table for support. My throat felt raw, like I'd swallowed sandpaper. Every breath was a reminder of how close I'd come to never breathing again. The crowd started to disperse, giving me space. I could hear murmured conversations, people discussing what had happened. Someone mentioned an ambulance, but the words didn't really register. I was still in shock, I think, my mind struggling to process the last few minutes. I looked around the room, seeing it with new eyes. The cheerful decorations, the platters of food, the half-empty glasses. It all seemed surreal now. How quickly things had changed. One moment, it was a normal Christmas party. The next, I was fighting for my life. As the adrenaline began to wear off, I felt exhausted. My whole body ached as if I'd run a marathon. My chest hurt from the effort of trying to breathe. I could feel a bruise forming on my abdomen where someone had performed the Heimlich maneuver. The taste of ham lingered in my mouth, a nauseating reminder of what had just happened. I doubted I'd ever be able to look at ham the same way again. Something so ordinary, so innocuous, had suddenly become terrifying. People were asking if I was okay, if I needed anything. Their voices sounded far away, muffled. I nodded mechanically, not really hearing the questions. I was walking home from my friend's Christmas party. It was late and the streets were pretty quiet. The air was cold, and I could see my breath in front of me. I'd had a few drinks, but I felt okay to walk. It wasn't too far, maybe about 20 minutes. The neighborhood was all decked out for Christmas. Houses had lights strung up, and there were inflatable Santas and snowmen on some lawns. It was nice, you know? Festive. I was just thinking about how I needed to get my own decorations up when I first noticed the car. It was just there, in my peripheral vision. A dark sedan, moving slowly down the street. At first, I didn't think much of it. People drive slow in residential areas all the time, right? But then I realized it was matching my pace. I glanced over, trying not to be too obvious about it. The windows were tinted, so I couldn't see inside. That's when I started to feel uneasy. Why would someone be driving that slow? Why were they keeping pace with me? I picked up my speed a little, hoping they'd just pass me by. But they didn't. The car sped up too, staying right beside me. My heart started beating faster. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was probably nothing. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I decided to cross the street, thinking maybe they were just waiting for me to move so they could park. As I crossed, I looked back. The car had stopped. For a second, I felt relieved. But then it made a U-turn and came back to my side of the street. Now I was really starting to freak out. This wasn't normal. This wasn't someone just happening to drive slowly. They were following me. I could feel my palms getting sweaty even in the cold air. My throat felt tight. I tried to act natural, like I hadn't noticed anything strange. But inside, my mind was racing. Should I call someone? But who? It was late, and I didn't want to bother anyone. Plus, what would I even say? That a car was driving near me? It sounded stupid even in my head. I thought about my phone in my pocket. I could pretend to make a call. Maybe that would scare them off. But what if that made them act? What if they thought I was calling the police? I was too afraid to even reach for it. The car was still there, still keeping pace. I could hear the engine, a low rumble that seemed to fill the quiet street. It was the only sound besides my footsteps and my own breathing, which was getting faster and more panicked. I was coming up to an intersection. I decided I'd turn right, away from my house. I didn't want them to know where I lived. As I turned, I heard the engine rev. It was loud, aggressive. My whole body tensed up. This wasn't just someone driving anymore. This was a threat. I started walking faster, almost jogging. The car sped up too. The engine revved again, louder this time. It was like they were taunting me, letting me know they could catch me anytime they wanted. I felt like a mouse being played with by a cat. My mind was spinning. What did they want? Was it because I was alone? Because I was an easy target? I cursed myself for walking home alone, for thinking it would be safe. I always thought things like this happened to other people, not to me. I looked around desperately for somewhere to go, somewhere safe. But everything was closed. All the houses were dark. There was no one around. I felt so alone, so exposed. The car was still there, still following. The engine revved again, and this time I broke into a run. I ran as fast as I could, my feet pounding on the sidewalk. I could hear the car behind me, engine roaring as it accelerated. They weren't even pretending anymore. They were chasing me. The sound filled my ears, getting closer and closer. I ran past houses, past parked cars, past Christmas decorations that now seemed eerie and mocking. My lungs were burning, my legs aching, but I couldn't stop. I knew if I stopped, something terrible would happen. I turned down another street, hoping to lose them. But they were right there, tires screeching as they made the turn. How long could I keep running? How long before they caught up? I was gasping for air, each breath painful in the cold night. That's when I saw it, like a beacon of hope in the darkness. A diner, its neon "open 24 hours" sign glowing in the night. I'd never been so happy to see a rundown diner in my life. I ran towards it with everything I had left. I could hear the car getting closer. The engine was so loud now, it felt like it was right on top of me. I was sure at any moment I'd feel a hand grab me, pulling me back. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just focused on that diner door. I burst through the door, the bell above it ringing wildly. The few people inside all turned to look at me. I must have been a sight, sweating, gasping for air, eyes wild with fear. I stumbled to the counter, gripping it to hold myself up. The car screeched to a stop outside. I was sure they were going to come in after me. I tried to speak, to tell someone what was happening, but I couldn't catch my breath. The waitress behind the counter looked concerned, asking if I was okay. I managed to gasp out something about being followed, about the car outside. The waitress peered out the window, then quickly moved to lock the door. She told someone to call the police. I collapsed onto a stool, my legs finally giving out. As I sat there, shaking and trying to breathe, I heard the car outside. The engine revved one more time, loud and menacing. Then with a squeal of tires, it sped off into the night. The sound faded away, but the fear didn't. I kept expecting them to come back, to burst through the door. The waitress brought me a glass of water. My hand was shaking so much I could barely hold it. She asked me questions, but I couldn't focus enough to answer. All I could think about was how close it had been. We were at the office Christmas party. You know how those things are. Cheap decorations, bad music, everyone trying to act like they're having a good time. I was ready to head home, but I needed to grab my coat from my desk upstairs. 5 of my co-workers decided to come with me. We all piled into the elevator, laughing about something stupid. I don't even remember what. The elevator started up like normal. We were on the 5th floor when it happened. There was this grinding noise. then a jolt. We all stumbled a bit. At first we thought it was just a rough stop, but then the doors didn't open. Someone pressed the button again. Nothing. That's when we realized we were stuck. No one was too worried at first. We figured someone would notice soon enough and get us out. We pressed the emergency call button, but nothing happened. No sound, no response. That's when I started to feel a little uneasy. One of my coworkers, this big guy from accounting, tried to pry the doors open. He couldn't budge them. We all took turns yelling for help, but the Christmas music from the party was too loud. No one could hear us. Time started to drag. We'd been in there maybe 20 minutes, and it was already getting uncomfortable. 6 people in a small elevator. It gets hot fast. We were all still in our party clothes, not exactly dressed for being trapped in a small space. The marketing guy started checking his phone every few seconds, like that would somehow make a signal appear. There was no service in the elevator. We were cut off. After about an hour, things started to get tense. The air felt thick and heavy. It was hard to take a deep breath. We were all sweating, and the smell was getting pretty bad. Someone made a joke about it, but no one really laughed. That's when the intern started to freak out. She'd been quiet the whole time, but suddenly she was gasping for air, saying she couldn't breathe. Her eyes were wide, darting around like a trapped animal. She started clawing at the walls, trying to find a way out that wasn't there. We tried to calm her down, but it just made things worse. She was hyperventilating, tears streaming down her face. She kept saying she was going to die in here. The rest of us exchanged looks. We were all thinking the same thing, but no one wanted to say it out loud. The big guy from accounting tried to help. He put his hand on her shoulder, told her to take deep breaths. But as soon as he touched her, she screamed. It was a horrible sound in that small space. She pushed him away and curled up in the corner, sobbing. The rest of us didn't know what to do. We were all on edge now. The reality of the situation was sinking in. We were trapped, with no way to call for help, and no idea when someone might find us. I started to feel the walls closing in. I've never been claustrophobic, but in that moment I understood the fear. The elevator seemed to be getting smaller by the minute. I closed my eyes, tried to imagine I was somewhere else, but I could still feel the press of bodies around me, still hear the ragged breathing of my co-workers. That's when the HR lady started complaining about chest pains. At first I thought she was just anxious like the rest of us, but then I saw her face. She was pale, her skin clammy. She kept rubbing her left arm. The marketing guy asked if she had a history of heart problems. She nodded, then winced in pain. We all looked at each other, the same thought running through our minds. What if she's having a heart attack? We had no way to help her. No medicine, no defibrillator, not even any water to give her. All we could do was watch as she slid down the wall, clutching her chest. The intern was still crying in the corner. The rest of us were frozen, helpless. The air was getting thinner, or maybe it just felt that way. Every breath was a struggle. My head was pounding, my vision blurring at the edges. I couldn't tell if it was from lack of oxygen or sheer panic. The big guy from accounting started pounding on the doors again, yelling for help. The sound was deafening in the small space. With each hit, the elevator shook slightly. I found myself worrying that he might damage something, send us plummeting down the shaft, but I didn't say anything. Part of me hoped he might actually break through. Time lost all meaning. It could have been minutes or hours. The HR lady was getting worse. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes unfocused. The marketing guy was trying to keep her awake, but you could see the fear on his face. None of us knew what to do if she lost consciousness. The intern had gone quiet. Too quiet. I looked over and saw her staring blankly at the wall, rocking slightly. She'd retreated into herself, trying to escape the only way she could. I envied her a little. I wished I could shut down, stop feeling the fear and helplessness. I started thinking about my family. Would I ever see them again? Would they find us in time? Or would they find 6 bodies in an elevator, victims of a Christmas party gone horribly wrong? The thought made me sick. The smell in the elevator was overwhelming now. Sweat, fear, and worse. Someone had thrown up in the corner. I was trying not to breathe through my nose, but it was impossible to escape. I found myself staring at the emergency hatch on the ceiling. In movies, people always escape through those, but in real life it was sealed shut. Just another false hope. The marketing guy's phone battery died. It shouldn't have mattered. We had no signal anyway. But somehow, it felt like losing our last connection to the outside world. The darkness felt more complete now. I don't know how much time had passed when we heard the first sound from outside. It was faint, barely audible over the HR lady's labored breathing and the intern's occasional whimper. But it was there. A voice. Someone was out there. We all started yelling at once, pounding on the doors, screaming until our throats were raw. The voice got louder. They'd heard us. Help was coming, but we weren't out yet. The HR lady was barely conscious now. The intern had started hyperventilating again. And the air, God, the air was so thin. Each breath was a struggle. My lungs burned, my head spun. I wasn't sure how much longer we could last. I could hear sounds of people working on the other side of the door. Mechanical sounds. Voices shouting instructions. They were trying to get us out. But would they be in time? The elevator suddenly jerked. We all grabbed onto each other, terrified we were about to fall. But then it started moving up, slowly. They were manually raising us to the next floor. I was at the company Christmas party at this fancy hotel downtown. You know, one of those events where everyone's trying to impress each other, pretending they're having a great time. I'd been there for a couple of hours, making small talk and sipping on overpriced cocktails. Nature called, so I excused myself and headed to the restroom. The bathroom was one of those single occupancy deals, all marble and fancy lighting. I went in and locked the door behind me. Did my business, washed my hands, and went to leave. That's when it happened. The door wouldn't open. I turned the handle, but it just spun loosely. No click, no nothing. At first, I thought I was just doing it wrong. Maybe it was one of those tricky locks you have to push and turn at the same time. I tried everything. Pushing, pulling, jiggling the handle. Nothing worked. The door was stuck fast. I called out, hoping someone would hear me. But the music from the party was too loud. I could barely hear it myself, just a muffled bass thumping through the walls. I knocked on the door, then started pounding. Still nothing. That's when I started to feel the first twinges of panic. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I figured someone would need the bathroom soon, right? They'd realize it was locked and get help. I just had to wait it out. But as time passed, that calm started to slip away. The bathroom suddenly felt much smaller. The air seemed thicker, harder to breathe. I kept glancing at my watch, watching the minutes tick by. 5 minutes. 10. 15. I tried calling for help again, this time screaming as loud as I could. My throat hurt from the effort, but I couldn't hear any response. Just that same muffled music seeming to mock me with its cheerful Christmas tunes. I started looking around the bathroom, searching for another way out. There was a small window, but it was frosted glass and didn't look like it opened. Plus, we were on the 3rd floor. Even if I could open it, there was no way I could safely get out that way. My phone was in my pocket, but of course, there was no signal. Just my luck to get trapped in the one spot in the hotel with no reception. I tried texting, hoping maybe the messages would go through, but the sending icon just spun endlessly. As more time passed, I could feel my heart starting to race. My palms were sweaty, and I was having trouble catching my breath. The walls seemed to be closing in. I splashed some water on my face, trying to calm down, but it didn't help. I started to imagine worst-case scenarios. What if no one noticed I was missing? What if the party ended and everyone left? Would I be stuck here all night, all weekend? My mind was spinning out of control, each thought more terrifying than the last. I tried to distract myself by looking for tools, anything I could use to force the door open. I rummaged through the cabinets, but there was nothing useful, just extra toilet paper and hand towels. I even considered trying to use the toilet paper holder as a lever, but it was firmly attached to the wall. The panic was really setting in now. My chest felt tight, like someone was sitting on it. I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears. The room started to spin a little. I sat down on the floor, putting my head between my knees, trying to steady myself. But sitting there, I felt even more trapped. The ceiling seemed to be pressing down on me. I jumped up, pacing back and forth in the small space. 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. It wasn't enough. I needed to get out. I went back to the door, pulling on the handle with all my strength. I kicked at it, threw my body against it. Nothing. Just a dull thud each time I hit it. My shoulder ached from the impact, but I couldn't stop. The pain was the only thing that felt real. Time lost all meaning. Had I been in here for an hour? 2? The party must have been winding down by now. What if everyone had left already? The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I imagined being trapped here for days, slowly dying of thirst while a cleaning crew worked just outside, unable to hear my weakening cries for help. My breathing was coming in short, sharp gasps now. I couldn't seem to get enough air. The room was spinning faster. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision. I slid down the door, my legs no longer able to support me. I could feel my heart racing, pounding so hard I was sure it would burst out of my chest. My fingers and toes started to tingle, then go numb. Was I having a heart attack? Or was this just panic? I couldn't tell the difference, and that scared me even more. I tried to call for help again, but all that came out was a weak croak. My throat was raw from all the screaming earlier. I pounded on the door one more time, but I barely had the strength to make a sound. The tingling spread up my arms and legs. My whole body felt disconnected, like it wasn't really mine anymore. The bathroom light seemed too bright, burning into my eyes. I squeezed them shut, but I could still see the glare behind my eyelids. I don't know how long I sat there, gasping for air, sure that each breath would be my last. Time stretched and warped. It could have been minutes or hours. All I knew was the panic, the feeling of walls pressing in on me, the certainty that I was going to die here on this cold bathroom floor. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, when the panic and the lack of air had brought me to the brink of passing out, I heard something, a voice. Faint at first, then louder. Someone was calling my name. I tried to respond, but I couldn't find my voice. I banged weakly on the door, praying they would hear me. The voice got closer. I heard rattling at the door, then suddenly, blessedly, it opened. I was up there, suspended from the church ceiling, dressed as an angel for our Christmas pageant. The harness dug into my sides, but I tried to ignore it. I had to focus on my part. Below me, I could see the congregation filling the pews, their faces turned up expectantly. The lights were bright, making everything below seem hazy and dreamlike. As the music started, I began my slow descent. That's when I felt it. A slight shift in the harness. At first I thought it was normal, just the usual adjustments as I moved. But then there was another shift, more pronounced this time. I tried to keep my face serene, to stay in character, but I could feel my heart starting to race. I was about halfway down when I heard a soft creaking sound above me. It was barely audible over the music, but it sent a jolt of fear through me. Something was wrong. I wanted to call out, to signal someone, but I was supposed to be a silent, graceful angel. I couldn't break character, could I? The next few seconds seemed to stretch on forever. I could feel the harness loosening bit by bit. My breathing quickened, and I'm sure anyone looking closely could see the panic in my eyes. I tried to make eye contact with someone, anyone, hoping they'd notice something was wrong. But everyone was focused on the performance, the music, the spectacle. Then it happened. There was a sudden snap, a moment of weightlessness, and then I was falling. The lights blurred into streaks as I plummeted. I could hear gasps from the congregation, see their faces contort in horror. But it all seemed distant, unreal. The only thing that felt real was the rush of air past my face and the sickening knowledge that I was about to hit the ground. The impact came faster than I expected. One moment I was falling, the next I was slamming into the hard floor. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. It felt like every bone in my body had shattered at once. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't even scream. All I could do was lie there, trying desperately to pull air into my lungs. The world around me erupted into chaos. I could hear screams, shouts, the scraping of chairs as people rushed forward, but it all sounded muffled, like I was underwater. My vision was blurry, the bright lights now painful to look at. I tried to move, to sit up, but my body wouldn't respond. The pain was too intense. As I lay there, I became acutely aware of every sensation. The cold hardness of the floor against my back, the taste of blood in my mouth, the way my costume, once flowing and angelic, now felt tangled and constrictive. I could feel something warm and wet spreading beneath me, and I realized with a jolt of terror that it was probably my own blood. People were crowding around me now. I could see their faces, mouths moving, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. Their expressions were a mix of shock, horror, and pity. I wanted to tell them I was okay, to reassure them somehow, but I couldn't form the words. The pain was too all-consuming. I don't know how long I lay there before I started to regain some clarity. The initial shock was wearing off, and with it came a new wave of pain, sharper and more defined. I could feel it radiating from my back, my legs, my head. Each breath was agony, and I was pretty sure I had broken ribs. My left arm was bent at an unnatural angle, and I couldn't feel my legs at all. That scared me more than anything. Someone was holding my hand now, squeezing it gently. I think it was meant to be comforting, but all I could focus on was the pain. I wanted to squeeze back to show them I was still here, still fighting, but I couldn't muster the strength. My entire body felt heavy, like it was made of lead. The faces above me started to blur together. I could hear sirens in the distance, growing louder. Help was coming, but it felt like it was taking forever. Each second stretched on endlessly, filled with nothing but pain and fear. I tried to focus on something, anything else. The Christmas decorations, the music that was still playing softly in the background, the worried faces of the congregation. But the pain always dragged me back. As I waited for the paramedics, my mind started to wander. I thought about how quickly everything had changed. One moment I was an angel, floating above everyone, part of something beautiful and sacred. The next, I was broken on the ground, surrounded by horror and chaos. It didn't seem real. Part of me was still waiting to wake up, to find out this was all just a terrible nightmare. The pain kept shifting, changing. Sometimes it was a dull, all-over ache. Other times it was sharp, localized, like someone was stabbing me with hot pokers. I tried to catalog my injuries to figure out what was wrong, but it was too overwhelming. Everything hurt. I couldn't tell where one injury ended and another began. I started to feel cold, really cold. Someone must have noticed, because suddenly there was a blanket over me, but it didn't help. The cold seemed to be coming from inside me, seeping into my bones. I was shivering, which only made the pain worse. I wanted to tell them to make it stop, to do something, anything. But I still couldn't speak. The church, which had always felt so familiar and safe, now seemed alien and threatening. The high ceiling loomed over me, a reminder of how far I had fallen. The pews cast long shadows in the bright lights. Even the Christmas decorations, which had seemed so cheerful earlier, now looked garish and out of place. I could hear people praying. Snatches of hurried, desperate prayers reached my ears. Under different circumstances, it might have been comforting, but right now it just added to the surreal nature of the situation. Here I was, dressed as an angel, surrounded by prayers, and in more pain than I'd ever experienced in my life. Our office Christmas party was in full swing. The conference room had been transformed with twinkling lights and tinsel, and the usual buzz of work was replaced by the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. I was standing near the refreshment table, nursing a cup of punch, when I first noticed something off about one of my coworkers. He was a guy from accounting, someone I didn't interact with much day to day. I'd seen him around, of course, but we'd never really talked beyond a quick hello in the hallway. Tonight, though, he was hard to miss. He was louder than usual, his voice carrying over the holiday music playing in the background. His movements were exaggerated, almost clumsy, as he navigated through the crowd. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was a party after all, and people tend to let loose at these things. But as the night wore on, I couldn't help but notice that his behavior was becoming increasingly erratic. He was getting in people's faces, talking too loud, laughing at things that weren't funny. I saw a few of our co-workers exchange concerned glances, stepping away from him when he approached. I tried to focus on my own conversations, on enjoying the party, but I kept finding my attention drawn back to him. There was something unsettling about the way he was acting, something that made me feel on edge even in the midst of the festive atmosphere. As the party started to wind down, I remembered that I'd left a gift in my car for a coworker who was organizing a charity drive. I figured it was a good time to slip out and grab it. The parking garage was just a short walk from our office building, and I thought the cool air might help clear my head. I made my way to the elevator, pressing the button for the parking level. As the doors were about to close, I heard quick footsteps approaching. A hand shot out, stopping the doors, and my stomach dropped when I saw who it was. The guy from accounting, the one who'd been acting strange all night. He stumbled into the elevator, muttering something under his breath. The doors closed, and suddenly the small space felt incredibly claustrophobic. I could smell the alcohol on his breath, sharp and unpleasant. He was swaying slightly, his eyes unfocused. I pressed myself into the corner of the elevator, trying to put as much space between us as possible. The ride down to the parking level felt like it took hours, even though I knew it was only a matter of seconds. When the doors finally opened, I rushed out, hoping he would stay behind. No such luck. I could hear his footsteps behind me as I walked briskly towards my car. The parking garage was dimly lit and eerily quiet compared to the party upstairs. My footsteps echoed off the concrete walls, and I became acutely aware of how alone we were down here. I tried to act natural, to not show how uncomfortable I was feeling. But when I glanced over my shoulder, I saw that he was following me, his pace quickening to match mine. My heart was pounding now, and I fumbled in my pocket for my car keys. I was about halfway to my car when he called out to me. His voice was slurred, angry. He was saying something about how I'd been avoiding him at the party, how I thought I was too good to talk to him. I didn't stop walking, didn't turn around. I just focused on getting to my car. But he was faster than I expected. Before I knew it, he was right behind me, grabbing my arm and spinning me around to face him. I found myself backed up against a concrete pillar, trapped between it and a nearby car. He loomed over me, his face twisted into an expression I'd never seen before. A mix of anger and something else, something that made my skin crawl. Up close, I could see how dilated his pupils were, how a vein was pulsing in his forehead. His breath came in short, angry puffs, hot against my face. I tried to reason with him, to calm him down, but my words seemed to bounce right off him. He wasn't listening, wasn't really seeing me. It was like he was in his own world, fueled by alcohol and whatever else was going on in his head. I glanced around frantically, looking for any sign of another person, any chance of help. But the parking garage was deserted. It was just me and him, surrounded by rows and rows of silent cars. I could feel panic rising in my chest, threatening to choke me. He started ranting, his words running together in a barely coherent stream. Something about how people at the office treated him, how no one respected him. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, and I was terrified that at any moment, he might lash out physically. I tried to inch away, to slide along the pillar and create some distance between us, but he noticed. He slammed his hand against the pillar next to my head, the sound echoing through the garage. I flinched, my whole body tensing up. I could feel the rough concrete digging into my back through my shirt. Time seemed to slow down. I was hyper-aware of everything. The cold air of the garage, the distant sound of traffic outside, the wild look in his eyes. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. Should I try to run? To fight back? To reason with him? Every option seemed impossible in that moment. He leaned in closer, his face just inches from mine. I could see every detail. The stubble on his chin, a small scar above his eyebrow, the beads of sweat on his forehead. His eyes were unfocused, darting around, never quite meeting mine. He raised his hand, and for a terrifying moment, I thought he was going to hit me. Instead, he placed his palm flat against the pillar on the other side of my head, effectively caging me in. I felt trapped, cornered like an animal. My breath was coming in short, quick gasps, and I was sure he must be able to hear how fast my heart was beating. He started talking again, his voice low and menacing. He was saying something about teaching me a lesson, about showing me what happens to people who disrespect him. I tried to interrupt, to tell him that I'd never disrespected him, that I barely knew him, but he talked right over me, his voice getting louder and angrier with each word. I realized then that this wasn't really about me. I was just a convenient target for whatever rage and frustration he'd been bottling up. That realization didn't make the situation any less terrifying, though. If anything, it made it worse. There was no reasoning with him, no way to talk my way out of this. My eyes darted around, looking for anything that could help me. That's when I spotted my car, just a few spaces away. My keys were still clutched tightly in my hand, digging into my palm. An idea flashed through my mind. A desperate, crazy idea, but the only one I had. He was still ranting, his face getting redder by the second. I knew I only had one chance at this. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Then, in one quick motion, I brought up my hand with the keys and pressed the panic button. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The car alarm blared through the quiet garage, impossibly loud in the enclosed space. The lights started flashing, painting the concrete walls with frantic streaks of light. He jerked back, startled by the sudden noise and light. For a split second, the anger on his face was replaced by confusion. I didn't waste that moment. I ducked under his arm and ran towards my car, my legs feeling weak and shaky. He yelled something behind me, but his words were drowned out by the continuing wail of the alarm. I could hear his footsteps, knew he was following me, but I didn't look back. I just ran, my lungs burning, my heart feeling like it was about to burst out of my chest. I reached my car and frantically tried to unlock it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely aim the key fob. I could hear him getting closer, his angry shouts mixing with the car alarm. Just as I managed to get the door open, I heard another sound. Voices, coming from the direction of the elevator. Security guards, drawn by the noise of the alarm. I saw flashlight beams cutting through the dim light of the garage. He must have heard them too, because he suddenly stopped. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw him standing there looking wild-eyed and uncertain. The office Christmas party was in full swing. I'd just arrived, fashionably late as usual, and the conference room was already packed. People from every department were mingling, their voices creating a constant buzz of conversation that almost drowned out the Christmas music playing in the background. I made my way through the crowd, nodding and smiling at familiar faces. The room was decorated with twinkling lights and tinsel, and a large Christmas tree stood in one corner. It was nice to see everyone relaxed and having fun, a stark contrast to our usual work environment. After chatting with a few colleagues, I decided to grab a drink. The makeshift bar was set up on one of the long tables, filled with various bottles and mixers. I reached for a glass of what looked like punch, the deep red liquid dotted with floating fruit pieces. As I took my first sip, I noticed how sweet it was, almost overpoweringly so. I figured it was just a strong mix and continued drinking. I started mingling again, glass in hand, making small talk about upcoming holidays and New Year's resolutions. It wasn't long before I began to feel off. At first it was subtle. The room seemed a bit brighter, the music a little louder. I blinked hard, trying to clear my head. Maybe the punch was stronger than I thought, I reasoned. I'd only had one glass, but I was already feeling lightheaded. As I continued to chat with my coworkers, I noticed that their words were starting to blur together. I had to concentrate hard to follow the conversation, and even then, I was having trouble forming coherent responses. My tongue felt heavy in my mouth, and my words came out slow and slurred. The room started to spin slightly, and I reached out to steady myself against a nearby wall. The texture of the wallpaper felt oddly intense under my fingertips, almost alive. I stared at my hand, fascinated by how it seemed to move in slow motion. I tried to shake off the feeling, convinced I just needed some fresh air. I started to make my way towards the exit, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. Each step was a concentrated effort, and I had to focus intently on not stumbling. The faces around me began to distort, stretching and warping like funhouse mirrors. I could see mouths moving, but the sounds reaching my ears were garbled and distant. It was as if I was underwater, everything muffled and slow. Panic started to set in as I realized something was seriously wrong. This wasn't just being tipsy from one strong drink. My heart was racing, but my body felt like it was moving through molasses. I tried to call out to someone, anyone, but my voice came out as a weak croak. The lights in the room seemed to pulsate, growing brighter and dimmer in a nauseating rhythm. Colors became more vivid, almost painfully so. The red of the Christmas decorations seemed to bleed into everything, tinting my vision. I stumbled, nearly falling. Someone caught my arm, steadying me. I looked up, trying to focus on their face, but it was just a blur of features. I tried to explain that I didn't feel right, that something was wrong, but the words wouldn't come out properly. They sounded foreign and jumbled to my own ears. Time seemed to lose all meaning. I couldn't tell if minutes or hours had passed. The party continued around me, but it felt like I was watching it from behind a thick pane of glass. Everything was distorted, dreamlike, yet terrifyingly real. My limbs started to feel numb, and a creeping sense of detachment washed over me. It was as if I was floating outside my own body, watching myself sway and stumble through the crowd. I knew I should be terrified, but even that emotion felt distant and muted. I managed to make it to a chair in the corner of the room, collapsing into it. The world spun around me, faces and lights blurring into a kaleidoscope of color and sound. I gripped the armrests, trying to anchor myself to something solid and real. Fragments of conversations drifted past me. I caught snippets about someone not feeling well, about calling for help. Were they talking about me? I couldn't be sure. Everything felt unreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I tried to stand up, to find someone who could help me, but my legs buckled beneath me. I slid to the floor, my back against the wall. The carpet felt rough against my palms, each fiber seemingly magnified 1,000-fold. People were gathering around me now. I could see concern on their faces, but their features kept shifting and changing. One moment they looked normal, the next they were grotesque caricatures. I wanted to scream, to tell them what was happening to me, but my mouth wouldn't cooperate. Someone was asking me questions, their voice sounding like it was coming from very far away. How much had I had to drink? Was I on any medication? Had I eaten anything unusual? I tried to answer, to explain about the punch, but my thoughts were scattered, impossible to gather. The room tilted and swayed, and I felt like I was on a ship in a storm. Nausea washed over me in waves, and I was terrified I was going to be sick right there on the office floor. I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the overwhelming sensory input, but that only made the spinning sensation worse. When I opened my eyes again, there were new faces, people in uniforms, paramedics, I realized dimly. They were shining a light in my eyes, asking me more questions. I tried to focus, to answer them, but it was like my brain and my mouth were no longer connected. I was driving home from the office Christmas party. The roads were pretty empty, which wasn't surprising given how late it was. I remember thinking about how I couldn't wait to get home and kick off my shoes. It had been a long night of small talk and forced laughter with coworkers I barely knew outside of work. The heater in my car was blasting warm air, fighting against the chill of the December night. Outside, a light snow had started to fall, the flakes catching the glow of the streetlights as they drifted down. It was kind of beautiful, in a way, but it also made me grip the steering wheel a little tighter. Snow always made me nervous when driving. I was on a long stretch of road, trees lining both sides. The snowfall was getting heavier, and I had to lean forward a bit to see better through the windshield. My wipers were working overtime, sweeping away the snow that was starting to accumulate. That's when I first noticed the headlights in my rearview mirror. They seemed to come out of nowhere, suddenly blazing bright behind me. I didn't think much of it at first. It was just another car on the road, probably someone else heading home late. But then the car started getting closer. Way too close. I could see the grille of the vehicle in my mirror, looming large. I tapped my brakes, thinking maybe they just didn't realize how close they were. The car behind me swerved slightly, then got even closer. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Something wasn't right. The car behind me was all over the road, weaving back and forth. 1 second, it was right on my bumper. The next, it was drifting into the oncoming lane. I started looking for somewhere to pull over, to let this crazy driver pass. But there was nowhere to go. The shoulder of the road was narrow, lined with a ditch on one side and dense trees on the other. I was stuck. Suddenly, the headlights behind me disappeared. For a split second, I felt relief. Then I realized the car hadn't fallen back. It had swerved into the oncoming lane and was trying to pass me. I saw the oncoming headlights before I saw the car. They were coming fast. Too fast. The car trying to pass me didn't seem to notice or care. It was a game of chicken and I was caught in the middle. I hit the brakes hard, my tires skidding on the snow-covered road. The car passing me shot forward, trying to get back into our lane. But it was too late. The sound of the crash was deafening. Metal crunching, glass shattering, tires screeching. It all happened so fast, yet it felt like slow motion. The car that had been trying to pass me collided head-on with the oncoming vehicle. They spun, a twisted dance of metal and momentum, and then they were coming at me. I tried to swerve to get out of the way, but the road was too slick. My car started to slide. I felt the impact before I saw it. The other cars slammed into me, and suddenly I was spinning too. The world outside my windows became a blur of white snow and black night. When everything finally stopped moving, the silence was absolute. For a moment, I couldn't process what had happened. My ears were ringing, and there was a strange taste in my mouth. Blood, I realized. I'd bitten my tongue. I tried to move, to unbuckle my seatbelt, but a sharp pain shot through my leg. Looking down, I saw that the dashboard had collapsed, pinning my legs. Panic started to set in as I realized I was trapped. The windshield was a spider web of cracks, but through it, I could see the other cars. One was on its side, steam or smoke rising from the crumpled hood. The other, the one that had been trying to pass me, was directly in front of me, our cars nose to nose. That's when I saw him, the driver of the other car. He was slumped over the steering wheel, motionless. Even through the shattered glass, I could see that his eyes were open, staring blankly. I knew immediately that he was dead. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. It was like my eyes were locked on him. I'd never seen a dead body before, not like this. It didn't seem real, but the longer I stared, the more real it became. The cold started to seep in. My car was dead, the heater no longer running. I could see my breath fogging up what was left of the windshield. I tried to move again, to find a more comfortable position, but the pain in my legs was too intense. I don't know how long I sat there staring at the lifeless body in the other car. It could have been minutes or hours. Time seemed to stand still. The snow continued to fall, covering the wreckage in a soft white blanket. It was eerily beautiful and terrifying at the same time. I tried to distract myself, to think about anything else, but my mind kept coming back to the man in the other car. Who was he? Did he have a family waiting for him at home? Did they know yet that he would never come back? The cold was getting worse. I couldn't feel my toes anymore, and my fingers were starting to go numb. I tried rubbing my hands together, blowing on them, anything to generate some warmth. But it was a losing battle against the frigid winter night. I started to wonder if anyone would find us. The road had been empty when the accident happened. How long would it be before another car came by? Would they even be able to see us with the snow covering everything? Every now and then, I'd hear a noise, a branch snapping under the weight of snow, the creak of metal as the wreckage settled. Each sound made me jump, made me hope that it was help arriving. But it never was. The pain in my legs had turned into a dull ache. I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. Was I getting used to it? Or was it a sign of something worse? I tried wiggling my toes, but I couldn't tell if they were moving or not. I kept fading in and out of full awareness. One moment I'd be alert, listening for any sign of rescue, and the next I'd find myself lost in memories or strange, half-formed thoughts. It was like my mind was trying to escape the horrific reality I was trapped in. But every time I came back to full awareness, he was there, the dead man in the other car. His eyes never closed, never moved. They just kept staring, empty and accusing. I found myself talking to him sometimes, apologizing, even though I knew it wasn't my fault. The inside of my car was like an icebox now. Frost had formed on the inside of the windows, creating delicate patterns. Under different circumstances, I might have found it beautiful. Now it was just another reminder of how dire my situation was. I tried to think about what I should do when help arrived. What would I tell them? How would I explain what happened? But every time I tried to put the events in order, they slipped away from me. Everything was a jumble of screeching tires, crunching metal, and those staring eyes. As time wore on, I started to lose feeling in my hands and feet. A part of me knew this was dangerous, that I should try to move, to keep my blood flowing. But I was so tired. The cold had seeped into my bones, making every movement an enormous effort. I don't know when I started to hallucinate. Maybe I wasn't. Maybe everything I saw and heard was real. But at some point I started seeing things move in the woods beyond the road. Shadows that shouldn't be there, lights that flickered and disappeared. The dead man started to move too, just small movements at first, a twitch of a finger, a slight turn of the head. I knew it couldn't be real, that it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but knowing that didn't make it any less terrifying. I tried closing my eyes, but that just made the sounds more intense. The creaking of metal became whispers. The wind through the trees became moans of pain. I couldn't escape it. Opening my eyes again, I saw that snow had started to pile up on the hood of my car. It was like the world was trying to bury us, to hide the evidence of this horrible night. I wondered if they would find us in the spring when the snow melted. Would there be anything left to find? The pain in my legs had faded to almost nothing now. I knew that should worry me, but I couldn't muster the energy to care. I was so cold, so tired. Part of me just wanted to sleep, to escape this nightmare. But every time I felt myself drifting off, something would jolt me awake. A sudden noise, a flash of movement from the body in the other car, the sharp pain as I tried to shift my position. I was at the office Christmas party, you know, the one we have every year at the top floor of our building. It's usually a pretty laid-back affair, with everyone from the different departments mingling and enjoying the free food and drinks. This year, they'd gone all out with the decorations. Tinsel everywhere, a massive Christmas tree in the corner, and even one of those life-size Santa cutouts near the elevators. I'd been there for about an hour, making small talk with colleagues and trying to avoid Dave from accounting, who always gets a bit too friendly after a few drinks. The music was loud, some cheesy Christmas playlist that someone had put together, and the room was warm from all the bodies packed in there. I was starting to feel a bit claustrophobic, so I decided to step away from the crowd for a moment. I made my way to a quieter corner of the floor, near the conference rooms. It was cooler there, and I could actually hear myself think. I was just about to check my phone when I heard voices coming from one of the rooms. The door was slightly ajar, and I recognized the voices immediately. It was my boss and Susan from HR. Now, I'm not one to eavesdrop, but something in their tone made me pause. They were speaking in hushed voices, which seemed odd given the noise from the party. I couldn't help but lean in a little closer to hear what they were saying. That's when I heard it. They were discussing layoffs planned for January. My stomach dropped as I heard them going through a list of names. And then, like a punch to the gut, I heard my own name mentioned. I felt like the floor had disappeared from under me. My mind was reeling, trying to process what I'd just heard. They were planning to let me go, along with several of my colleagues, right after Christmas of all times. I knew I had to get out of there before they realized I was listening. But as I tried to move away, my elbow knocked against a vase on a nearby table. It wobbled precariously, and in my panic to steady it, I ended up knocking over a tray of drinks someone had left there. The crash of glass hitting the floor seemed impossibly loud. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The voices in the room stopped abruptly, and I heard footsteps approaching the door. My boss stepped out, his eyes widening in surprise when he saw me. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I could see the realization dawn on his face. He knew that I had heard everything. Susan appeared behind him, her usual composed expression replaced by one of alarm. I mumbled something about cleaning up the mess and tried to move past them, but my boss caught my arm. He started to say something, probably trying to come up with an explanation, but I couldn't bear to hear it. I shook off his hand and hurried back towards the main party area, my mind in complete chaos. The rest of the party was a blur. I found myself back among my colleagues, all of them laughing and enjoying themselves, completely unaware of what I'd just learned. Someone handed me a drink, and I took it without thinking, needing something to do with my hands. I couldn't focus on any conversations. Every time someone spoke to me, I had to force myself to pay attention, to nod and smile as if everything was normal. But inside, I was falling apart. I kept thinking about my mortgage, my car payments, the Christmas presents I just bought. How was I going to manage all of that without a job? The worst part was looking around at my co-workers, some of whom I'd worked with for years. I knew some of their names were on that list too, but I couldn't say anything. How could I ruin their holidays with this news? So I stood there, nursing my drink, feeling like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. As the night wore on, I found it harder and harder to maintain my composure. The room felt too hot, too loud. Every time I caught sight of my boss or Susan, I felt a wave of nausea. They were moving through the crowd, chatting and laughing as if they hadn't just been discussing destroying people's livelihoods. At one point, I found myself face to face with my boss at the drinks table. He looked at me with a mixture of guilt and something else. Was it pity? I couldn't stand it. I quickly filled my glass and moved away, not trusting myself to speak. The party seemed to go on forever. I watched as my colleagues got progressively more drunk and jolly. Someone started a karaoke session, and the off-key singing was like nails on a chalkboard to my frayed nerves. I wanted nothing more than to leave, to get out of there and process what I'd learned. But I knew that leaving too early would raise suspicions. As midnight approached, I felt like I was about to crack. The fake smiles, the forced laughter, it was all becoming too much. I was standing near the Christmas tree, half-heartedly listening to a story from the new intern, when I saw my boss approaching with Susan in tow. That was it. I couldn't do it anymore. I muttered some excuse about not feeling well and needing to leave. I didn't even wait for a response before I was moving towards the exit, weaving through the crowd of tipsy co-workers. I grabbed my coat from the rack, not even bothering to put it on properly. As I waited for the elevator, I could feel eyes on me. I turned to see my boss watching me from across the room, a concerned look on his face. The elevator dinged, and I practically threw myself inside, jabbing the button for the ground floor repeatedly. As the doors closed and the elevator began its descent, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The cheerful Christmas music faded away, replaced by the hum of the elevator. I leaned against the wall, my mind racing with what I'd learned and what it meant for my future. The elevator reached the ground floor, and I stumbled out into the quiet lobby. The security guard gave me a curious look, probably wondering why I was leaving the party so early. I didn't stop to explain. I pushed through the revolving door and out into the cold December night, leaving behind the warmth and cheer of the party, carrying with me the chilling knowledge of what the new year would bring. I was at my friend's Christmas party. It was supposed to be a fun night, you know. Just a bunch of us hanging out, drinking eggnog, exchanging gifts, the usual holiday stuff. The house was all decked out with lights and decorations. Christmas music was playing in the background and everyone was in a good mood. I'd been there for maybe an hour when I noticed something was off. There was this guy standing in the corner of the living room. At first I thought he was just another guest, but he looked different. He wasn't smiling or chatting like everyone else. He was just standing there, staring at someone across the room. It took me a minute to realize who he was staring at. It was my friend's roommate, the one who was hosting the party with her. And then it clicked. This was her ex, the one she'd broken up with a few months ago, the one who hadn't taken it well. I watched him for a bit. He was fidgeting, kept running his hand through his hair. His eyes never left her. It was unsettling. I could see other people starting to notice him too. The conversations around him got quieter, and people were giving him sidelong glances. My friend, the host, finally noticed him. I saw her face change. She went pale and her smile just vanished. She made her way over to him, trying to be casual about it, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but it was clear it wasn't going well. His voice was getting louder and people were starting to stare. My friend was trying to keep her voice down, probably trying to avoid making a scene, but he wasn't having it. Suddenly, he grabbed her arm. Not violently, but forcefully enough that several people gasped. That's when her roommate stepped in. He got between them, trying to separate them. He was talking to the ex, gesturing towards the door. It was pretty clear he was asking him to leave. For a second, I thought it was going to be okay. The ex let go of my friend's arm and took a step back. But then, everything went to hell. The ex shoved the roommate. Hard. He stumbled back, knocking into a table. A vase fell and shattered on the floor. The music cut off abruptly, and suddenly the room was silent, except for the sound of breaking glass. The ex started yelling. I couldn't make out everything he was saying, but I heard bitch and liar and other nasty stuff. People were backing away from him, creating this weird empty circle around him and my friend. Someone, I think it was the roommate, told him to get out. That's when the ex really lost it. He grabbed a bottle off a nearby table and smashed it against the wall. Now he was holding this jagged piece of glass, waving it around and screaming. Everything happened so fast after that. People were screaming, trying to get away from him. But he was between us and the front door. Someone tried to run for the back door, but he saw them and moved to block that exit too. He was yelling that no one was leaving, that we were all going to listen to what he had to say. I ended up pressed against the far wall with a bunch of other people. We were all frozen, watching this guy wave around a broken bottle and rant about how he'd been wronged. My friend was crying, begging him to stop, to just leave. But he wasn't listening. He started smashing things. Pictures on the walls, ornaments on the Christmas tree. All the while he kept screaming about how my friend had ruined his life, how she was going to pay for what she'd done. With every crash, every shatter, I flinched. We all did. Someone whispered that they'd called the police. I felt a moment of relief, but then I realized we were trapped in here with this unstable, violent guy. How long would it take for the police to get here? What would he do in the meantime? The ex must have heard the whisper about the police because he started getting more agitated. He was pacing back and forth in front of the doors, still holding that broken bottle. His eyes were wild, darting around the room. I was terrified he was going to start attacking people. Minutes stretched on like hours. Every sound from outside made us all tense up. Was it the police? Or just a passing car? The ex kept ranting, but his words were becoming less coherent. He was sweating, despite the chill in the room from the open windows. I noticed some people trying to open the windows wider, probably hoping to escape that way. But we were on the second floor. Even if we could get a window open without him noticing, it was too high to jump safely. At one point, he focused on my friend again. He lunged towards her, bottle raised. Several people screamed. Her roommate tried to get between them again, but the ex swung the bottle at him. It caught him on the arm, leaving a long, bloody gash. That's when I thought, this is it. He's going to kill someone. The roommate was clutching his bleeding arm, and my friend was sobbing hysterically. The ex was standing over them, bottle poised to strike again. But then we heard it. Sirens. Faint at first, but getting louder. The ex froze. For a second, nobody moved. Nobody even breathed. Then he started panicking. He was yelling at us to tell the police to go away, that if anyone made a sound, he'd start stabbing people. The sirens got louder. We could see flashing lights through the windows now. The ex was losing it completely. He was swinging the bottle around wildly, smashing anything within reach. Picture frames, lamps, glasses, anything breakable was getting destroyed. We all huddled together, trying to stay as far from him as possible. He was between us and both exits, wild-eyed and unpredictable. The sound of breaking glass was constant now, punctuated by his screams and the ever-louder sirens. I could hear car doors slamming outside, footsteps on the stairs. The ex was backed into a corner now, bottle held out in front of him like a sword. His eyes were darting around frantically, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. There was a loud bang on the door. A voice shouted, "Police! Open up!" The ex's face. I'll never forget the look on his face. It was like he finally realized the situation he was in. But instead of calming down, he seemed to make a decision. He raised the bottle and charged towards the door, screaming incoherently. That's when the door burst open. Police officers flooded in, guns drawn. They were shouting orders, telling him to drop the weapon and get down. For a moment, I thought he was going to attack the officers. He was still charging, bottle raised. But then one of the officers fired. There was a loud pop and the ex dropped like a stone. Later I found out it was a beanbag round, not a real bullet. But in that moment, all I knew was that he was down and it was over. The room erupted into chaos again, but this time it was the chaos of relief. People were crying, hugging each other. The police were securing the ex, who was conscious but subdued. Paramedics rushed in to check on the injured roommate and anyone else who was hurt. As they led the ex out in handcuffs, I caught a final glimpse of his face. The wild rage was gone, replaced by something else. Confusion, maybe, or regret. I don't know. But in that moment, as the adrenaline started to wear off and the reality of what we'd just been through began to sink in, all I could think was how quickly a normal Christmas party had turned into a nightmare. I'd been looking forward to our company's Christmas party for weeks. It was at this fancy restaurant downtown, the kind of place I'd never go to on my own. When I walked in, the place was decked out in twinkling lights and garlands. The air smelled like cinnamon and pine, and soft Christmas music played in the background. I spotted some of my coworkers near the bar and made my way over. Everyone was dressed up and seemed to be in high spirits. I'm not usually big on office parties, but the atmosphere was infectious. One of the guys from accounting handed me a drink, some kind of holiday cocktail with a cinnamon stick in it. It looked festive, so I took a sip. The party was in full swing. People were laughing, sharing stories about their holiday plans, and snacking on the fancy hors d'oeuvres being passed around. I was chatting with a couple of people from marketing when I started to feel off. At first I thought maybe the rich food wasn't sitting well with me. But then things started to get weird. The room seemed to tilt slightly, and the Christmas lights began to blur together. I blinked hard, trying to focus. My coworker was still talking, but her words sounded far away and distorted. I nodded, pretending everything was fine, but inside I was starting to panic. What was happening to me? I excused myself, saying I needed to use the restroom. As I made my way across the restaurant, it felt like I was walking through molasses. The floor seemed to shift under my feet, and I had to concentrate hard on each step. I bumped into a waiter, nearly knocking over his tray of drinks. I mumbled an apology, but I'm not sure if it came out right. Finally, I reached the bathroom. I pushed open the door and stumbled inside, gripping the edge of the sink for support. My reflection in the mirror was alarming. My pupils were huge and my face looked pale and clammy. I splashed some water on my face, hoping it would help, but it didn't do much. That's when I heard voices outside the bathroom door. I recognized them, 2 guys from the IT department. They were laughing about something. I was about to call out for help when I heard one of them say, "Did you see how many people took the spiked drinks? This prank is going better than we thought." My blood ran cold. Spiked drinks? Prank? Suddenly, my condition made a terrifying kind of sense. I wanted to burst out of the bathroom and confront them, but my body wouldn't cooperate. My legs felt like jelly, and the room was spinning faster now. I slid down to the floor, my back against the cool tile wall. I tried to reach for my phone in my pocket, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't grip it properly. It clattered to the floor, sliding under the stall door. Time became a blur. I don't know how long I sat there, fighting waves of nausea and disorientation. The bathroom light seemed painfully bright one moment, then dim and shadowy the next. I could hear the muffled sounds of the party continuing outside, completely unaware of what was happening to me. At one point, someone came into the bathroom. I wanted to call out for help, but when I opened my mouth, no words came out. Just a strangled sort of groan. The person quickly left, probably thinking I was drunk and choosing to avoid the situation. My mind raced with terrifying thoughts. What exactly had they put in the drinks? How much had I consumed? Would there be lasting effects? I tried to remember everything I knew about date rape drugs and other substances, but my thoughts were too scattered to focus. The nausea hit me hard, and I barely made it to the toilet in time. As I retched, I felt utterly helpless and violated. These were my co-workers, people I saw every day. How could they do something like this? After what felt like hours, the worst of the physical symptoms started to subside. The room was still spinning, but not as violently. I managed to pull myself up using the sink for support. My reflection looked terrible, pale, sweaty, with red-rimmed eyes. I knew I needed to get out of there to find help or at least get home safely. But the thought of facing the party, of potentially running into the guys who had done this, filled me with dread. What if they realized I knew? What might they do? Gathering every ounce of strength I had left, I stumbled towards the bathroom door. My hand shook as I reached for the handle. I could still hear the party outside. Laughter, music, the clinking of glasses. It sounded surreal, like it was happening in another world. As I opened the door, the noise and lights hit me like a physical force. I squinted, trying to orient myself. The restaurant seemed huge and maze-like now. I spotted the exit sign glowing in the distance, my beacon of safety. I just had to make it there without drawing attention to myself. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the bathroom, clinging to the wall for support. The journey across the restaurant felt like crossing a minefield. Every laugh, every sudden movement made me flinch. I was hyper-aware of everyone around me, terrified of running into the IT guys or anyone else who might have been involved in the prank. Halfway to the exit, I locked eyes with my manager. She frowned, clearly noticing something was wrong. I saw her start to make her way towards me, concern on her face. Panic surged through me. I couldn't face her, couldn't explain what had happened. Not now, not like this. With a burst of adrenaline, I pushed off the wall and made a beeline for the exit. I heard my name called out behind me, but I didn't stop. I burst through the doors into the cold night air, gasping. The street spun around me as I tried to figure out what to do next. Our neighborhood always did this Christmas caroling thing. It was one of those traditions that everyone just kind of went along with, you know? That night, it was pretty cold, but not unbearable. The streets were lined with those inflatable Santas and reindeer, and most houses had their Christmas lights on. It made the whole place feel like some kind of winter wonderland. I remember walking down my driveway, seeing my breath in the air. There were already about 20 people gathered at the corner of our street. Some kids were running around, playing in the small patches of snow left from last week's storm. Parents were chatting, adjusting scarves, and handing out song sheets. We started moving as a group, going house to house. The first few stops were pretty standard. We'd sing a couple of carols. People would come out and listen, maybe give us some hot chocolate or cookies. Some of the older folks in our group had really good voices. Me? I just kind of mumbled along, trying not to stick out. As we made our way down Maple Street, I noticed the group had gotten bigger. Must have been close to 30 people by then. More kids had joined and they were getting excited, running ahead to the next house and then back to their parents. It was nice, you know? Seeing everyone together like that. We'd been at it for maybe an hour when we turned onto Oak Drive. This street always went all out with decorations. There were lights everywhere, those projector things that put moving snowflakes on the houses, and even a few of those synchronized light and music displays. It was like walking through a Christmas card. I was near the back of the group, kind of hanging out with some of the other teenagers who were too cool to sing but not cool enough to skip the whole thing entirely. We were all huddled together trying to stay warm and scrolling through our phones. That's when I first heard it. At first it was just a low rumble, like distant thunder. But it was getting louder, fast. I looked up from my phone trying to figure out what it was. That's when I saw the headlights. They were moving fast, way too fast for a residential street, and they were weaving, like the driver couldn't keep the car straight. In that moment, everything seemed to slow down. I could see the car more clearly now. It was an old sedan, dark-colored. The headlights were cutting through the night, illuminating the falling snow in these weird, shifting patterns. I wanted to yell, to warn everyone, but my voice caught in my throat. The car was coming straight for us, and it wasn't slowing down. Some of the adults must have noticed too, because I heard gasps and shouts. Parents were grabbing their kids, trying to pull them out of the street. But it all happened so fast. 1 second, we were this happy group singing carols, and the next, chaos. The car plowed right into the middle of our group. I saw people being thrown into the air like rag dolls. The sound was, I don't even know how to describe it. It was this horrible mix of screeching tires, crunching metal, and screams. I was lucky. I was on the edge of the group, and somehow I managed to stumble backward onto someone's lawn. But others, God, it was awful. There were bodies everywhere. Some people were moving, trying to get up. Others were just still. The car had finally stopped, having crashed into one of those big inflatable Santas. The airbags had gone off, and I could see the driver slumped over the wheel. Steam was rising from the crumpled hood, mixing with the snow in the air. For a moment, everything was quiet, like the whole world was holding its breath. Then, all at once, it was like someone hit play again. People started screaming, crying, calling out for help. I saw a woman crawling towards a small shape in the snow. Her child, I realized with a sickening jolt. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to help, but I was frozen in place. My eyes kept darting from one horrific scene to another. A man was kneeling next to an older woman, pressing his jacket against her head. A teenager, someone I recognized from school, was sitting up, looking dazed, blood streaming down his face. Someone started shouting about calling 911. I fumbled for my phone, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I heard sirens in the distance getting closer. How long had it been? A minute? An hour? Time didn't make sense anymore. The flashing lights of the first responders cut through the night, reflecting off the snow and the shattered glass on the street. Paramedics rushed in, moving from person to person. Police officers started cordoning off the area, pushing back the growing crowd of onlookers who had come out of their houses to see what had happened. I remember one of the paramedics coming up to me, asking if I was hurt. I shook my head, unable to speak. She nodded and moved on to someone else who needed help more urgently. I watched as they started loading people into ambulances. Some were on stretchers, others were able to walk with assistance. The driver of the car was being pulled out by firefighters. He was conscious now, mumbling something I couldn't hear. The smell of alcohol was strong enough that I could smell it from where I stood. More emergency vehicles arrived. The street that had been filled with Christmas cheer just moments ago now looked like a war zone. Pieces of broken decorations were scattered among the debris from the accident. A child's mitten lay in a patch of blood-stained snow. I couldn't stop staring at the scene in front of me. The caroling group that had been so full of life was now broken and scattered. Some were being tended to by paramedics. Others were giving statements to police officers. And some were being covered with white sheets. The realization of what had just happened was starting to sink in. This wasn't just an accident. This was a tragedy. Our neighborhood, our community, had been shattered in an instant. All because someone decided to drive drunk. As I stood there watching the chaos unfold, I couldn't help but think about how quickly everything had changed. One moment, we were celebrating the holiday season, spreading joy through our neighborhood. The next, we were in the middle of a nightmare. The sound of more sirens filled the air as additional emergency vehicles arrived. The entire street was bathed in the pulsing red and blue lights. I could hear snatches of radio chatter from the police and paramedics as they coordinated their efforts. Neighbors were coming out of their houses now, drawn by the commotion. Some were in shock, others were rushing to help however they could. I saw people bringing out blankets, offering water, doing whatever they could to assist the victims and first responders. The scene was a strange mix of holiday cheer and utter devastation. Christmas lights still twinkled on the houses, casting an eerie glow over the accident scene. Pieces of the shattered car were strewn across lawns decorated with festive ornaments. The contrast was jarring, almost surreal. As the initial shock began to wear off, I started to notice more details. The car had left deep gouges in someone's lawn before it had come to a stop. Bits of glass from shattered headlights glittered in the snow like macabre Christmas decorations. The scent of gasoline mixed with the pine smell from broken Christmas trees that had been knocked over in the chaos. I overheard snippets of conversations around me. People were trying to piece together what had happened, sharing what they had seen. The shock was evident in their voices. The disbelief that something like this could happen in our quiet neighborhood, especially on a night meant for celebration. The police were starting to take statements now. An officer approached me, notepad in hand. He asked me what I had seen, his voice calm and professional. I tried to recount the events, but it all seemed jumbled in my mind. The officer was patient, gently prompting me when I faltered. As I spoke, I realized how close I had come to being one of the victims, if I had been just a few feet closer to the center of the group. The thought made my stomach churn. Hey there again. Hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to hit the like button and to subscribe to the channel. This will really help the channel to grow and you can be notified of the new videos. And I have something more for you. I chose another video for you to watch. Just click the card here to go to the video. Hope you like it. See you there.